Hello everyone, welcome back to Planet Zoo. Today we are going to be finishing off our final habitat area of this entrance to our nice big zoo, Saltwell Safari Park. So we're starting by putting in a little staff building, and I'm going to leave this one really basic for now because I'm going to do some finishing touches in our final episode of this part of the series, which will be our 20th episode. So for this milestone, I'm really quite pleased that we have now finished off this area. And by episode 20 it'll be simple finishing touches. Now when we do come to that episode, before I crack on with talking about this episode, there will be a few things already done. Off camera I'm going to put in a load of trees and just kind of flesh out the actual terrain that isn't part of any walkways, habitats or anything like that, because I don't really want to show me running around dropping trees down in various places. I just think it's not really going to lend anything to new content or something that's entertaining for you guys. So that's going to get done off cam and maybe a few other little bits and pieces, but the main things that I'm going to finish off are like guest areas, pathways, walkways, viewing areas, putting in some new staff buildings and decorating the train line and a few other bits and pieces, and then we will officially finish this part of the zoo, which I'm really excited about. So yeah, I wanted to build a brand new overflow staff area with some bigger buildings in and just get them all nice and tidy, because we've had a few issues in the running of the zoo. Our Wild Africa habitat had a huge disease outbreak, so most of those animals are now in quarantine, and it really hurt us. Our reputation went down, we had a lot of issues there, and it was actually because a water purifier had been removed and not replaced. So that's now been sorted just about. Most of the animals are now in quarantine, but it has given me a bit of a wake-up call to actually edit some of my staff areas and make sure that the work zones are a little bit smaller, and I put in a few new staff buildings. So onto this one. This was just basic buildings, everything staff related is put in place, and we will be finishing it as part of our final episode of the series, so all of that external work will be done then. Our main habitat for today is a mixed lemur habitat, so we'll be having the ringtail lemur and the red ruffed lemur in a big greenhouse type thing that I'm going to make look a bit like a church. We'll call it the Church of King Julian, I guess. If you're a fan of Madagascar, I guess he would think he warranted one anyway, so that's what we'll do. The Church of King Julian, I guess. And I did a little bit of experimenting with this one. I'd been wanting to do a dome or a curved build for quite some time, and I thought a church was a pretty good place to start. So I'll talk about that when we actually get into it. And this is basically the staff building sorted now, and this staff building is going to facilitate the lions, the penguins, the hippopotamuses probably, and the lemurs themselves. So it's mainly because our staff are getting a little bit strung out, and I did try doing a little bit of detail on this build just to actually quickly come back to it, but I deleted this very quickly because it didn't really work. But I will come back to this at the end of the episode, and we'll finish all of this off, put in some nice foliage, and make the building themselves look a little bit more detailed, shall we say. So the church starts off pretty simple. We go with 4-meter breeze block, then we put in one of the archways, and then add on some of the glass greenhousey type classical architecture. We're then using Arctic wood planks to create a trim. And it's really important when you're doing these dome builds that you get that first piece completely finished, because once you start doing the duplications that are required to make it, it's very difficult to recover from any issues, as you then have to do a lot of editing. So I'm making these trims now, and then when I duplicate these single pieces, we'll be moving them all in one location and rotating them around to create the finished piece. And it's something that I've never really done before properly. Obviously we did it with the African lion habitat when we first made that circular structure for them to actually be in. That was the original lion pit, and that's now being changed bit by bit and will be finished in episode 20. We're going to do a little bit more development on that. And then it was a case of playing around with what I kind of wanted the dome to look like on the top. And you get some lovely patterns of like interlocking glass pieces from these, and it's really fun to play with. So I would definitely recommend, if you've never tried it before, give it a go. There are tutorials out there on YouTube on how you do this. I mean, I'm happy to do one myself. It would be a nice quick mini-sode, but it's stuff that's already been done. A lot of creators have already put on how you can actually do this and how easy it is, and it is very easy. It is literally just a case of you make one piece, you get it rotated on that central axis, and then you start moving it around, duplicating those pieces, and then you keep going. And it's really nice and easy to do once you get it. It is just a case of lining everything up. As you'll see as we go round, by the time we get to our last rotation and our last duplication, we end up with a bit of an overlap. So it is really about just being nice and precise and making small adjustments to these pieces as you go round, and eventually everything looks pretty good. And I like how this looks. It's actually reminding me a little bit of the Globe Theatre. Obviously it's not built out of breeze block, it's got more of that plaster and wood finish, but it certainly gave me another idea for a build that I may bring to this zoo later on. Talking of zoos, people have been asking if I could maybe do another franchise mode and run two alongside each other, and I have been planning on doing so. So after we get through the finishing touches of this, I'm going to take a small break from this zoo, and we will be doing a thematic zoo. There are going to be a couple of mini-sodes where I lay down the foundations for that, and then we'll come back to it and start developing it. So we've got our dome here, looking really good, nice and finished, and look at that lovely pattern. Really like it. And we've got a nice little wooden circle right on the top, which we can actually add some finishing touches on the top of, like we could do a little spire or something. And what I'm doing here, because I actually only wanted half of the dome, I didn't want the whole circle itself, so we're removing an entire semicircular section of the dome, and then I will tell you what happens next. So what we do is, once we've removed all of the bits from the middle here, our last piece then becomes the foundation of the rest of the building. And all it means is we have to get this entire structure put in place first. It's pretty easy though to maneuver everything, because once you've actually got this built, you can highlight each individual object as long as it's not made up of too many pieces, and you can move it all as one block. And actually I could probably save this as a blueprint and have the entire building ready for something else. So we're just making sure that we've got everything highlighted here, and what I could do is just grab this end piece and bring these up, and that makes our main part of the structure, which continues on right the way to the back where the actual dome itself is. So it looks really cool. We're taking away these bits because I wanted to play around with actually designing a proper church roof, as if we have that like big entrance hall that's pretty open and probably a bit taller than the back piece. And I will tell you now, it didn't end up finishing off that way. Things changed. I wasn't happy with the structure. Working with the breeze blocks, it was a little bit too flat, and there was a lot of extra work that needed to be done. So what I ended up doing was making it look a little bit like a church, where the roof had kind of fallen through, and we'd repaired it all with glass and turned it into a nice big open greenhouse, which I think actually makes a lot more sense, given the fact that this is the climate that we are building the zoo in is probably typically British weather, and this habitat that we're building is going to be a pretty tropical climate, so we kind of need to have a big open glass based build here, I guess. It reminds me a little bit near where I lived. It's no longer there, but there was this huge nursery, like a plant nursery, and they had this the biggest greenhouse I've ever seen, and they had like rainforest plants in and everything, and it was kind of like it was almost like a small like biodome where they had loads of different tropical plants, and everything was temperature controlled, and yeah, it was really warm when you went in there, even on like a cold wet day. And unfortunately it's no longer that purpose anymore. It's been changed into something else, I think. I mean, it still stands to this day. I just don't think they have the money or funding available to actually keep it running as it was, and it's no longer open to visitors as far as I'm aware, which is a shame. So anyway, taking inspiration from that, we made some nice little front pieces for it. I'd love to go back to the church idea, because I think it would be quite a nice thing to do. Like in Liverpool, there's a very famous church that was actually bombed during the war, and the Beatles performed there. and I think there's been quite a few like musical performances in there now, and it's just completely open to the elements. The actual core structure of it is still in place, but the rest of it has collapsed. Like there's no roof on it or anything, but it's really cool. I'd quite like to bring something like that into a zoo. It's really interesting. A lot of like UK ruined buildings and stuff, I see them as being repurposed for habitats for zoos now. I think pretty much every episode now I get a new idea about what we can do. So anyway, we built our fronts, and the one thing I don't like about him is the corner piece there does not sit right, and it's very difficult to find pieces that make it look appealing to the eye. So we kind of left it, and I will come back and maybe sort something out, and it might well be that we leave it and just leave it with like a brick wall behind it. It's not ideal, but it's also probably the best we can actually achieve with it, as you can see there. And then we'll maybe open out some other pieces of the wall to make sure that it's got light coming through it. It's just very difficult when you're going from a square piece on one side to a circular piece on the other to actually get it matching up. It's a shame we don't have any big curved like walls. Now I do know there are some glass pieces, and you can actually use them to make it work. I tried with the Arctic wood, but the angle wasn't quite right on the curve and it didn't really work. It doesn't really matter for now though. We're putting in these next pieces as we build up the rest of the church. Having to move our doorway a little bit, but I really like how flush everything has fit. Like the staff entrance doors right on the side there, and the guest entrance fits perfectly with the station surrounds. So it was pretty cool, and I wanted to keep these bits flat at first because I was still sticking with the church theme, and we put on some rounded pieces. I even went as far as putting the wooden trims on these bits, and I think it looks good, but it didn't feel right. There was something about it that I didn't quite like, and I think it was there were too many breeze block pieces involved in this, and it suddenly became very flat. So we had this wonderful structure right at the rear of the building, and I could see the potential. It seemed to be developing into something, but I very quickly wondered what exactly it would be developing into, and that kind of put me off carrying on with the build and finishing it off. I mean, I love playing around with bits and pieces and making things up as I go, and I think it would have turned out to be quite a nice structure. But I also wanted to be aware of the fact that we have a huge building right here that we're working on, right next to our clock tower, which was supposed to be a bit of a domineering feature for the actual zoo itself. So when you leave that train station, you've got that huge clock tower, which admittedly needs a bit of work to finish it off because it looks very boring at the moment. But I still think this was taking too much attention away from what is supposed to be a pretty key iconic part of the zoo itself. And it may well be that when we come to do those finishing touches, we raise the clock tower's face up a little bit more and then put some trims and things on that just to make it stand out and make it pop a lot more, because at the moment it's not doing that, and it's not doing it for me or the guests. We have got another issue with the clock tower, but I can talk about that another time. So things were starting to come together. I didn't really like how flat the front of the build was. It didn't really have anything to bring it in. So we're just skipping through. I've put the trims on and taken the roof off. We've added a brand new glass structure going right the way to the top, and then all of the rest of these pieces we're just going to duplicate and move them along, and then I'm going to modify the roof somewhat to make it look a little bit more well-rounded and as if it's part of a complete structure. So these front two glass pieces are going to go up a little bit, and we're going to create kind of like a little topping for it, and then put these bits into place. And it looks better than I anticipated. I thought it would be a bit of an overkill when it came to using all of these glass pieces and just having it as flat glass all the way along. I tried with a little bit of a variation on the glass structure at the front, but it didn't really work, so we just carried on with these 1 meter angled pieces and then put everything back into place. And once I put the wood trim right the way through, full disclosure, I only recently worked out that you could actually paint the glass outer rims a different colour. More fool me, because I would have done that from the beginning if I'd bothered to realise that we could do that. and then I may not have had to do as much trim work as I have done. However, I do think the white adds a nice little bit of a contrast in the colour, so I'm okay with leaving it. We then put on some final bits of glass just to make sure that there was plenty of light coming through, also imagining that it brings in a lot of heat. So I'm guessing this will be a nice and warm habitat, and the guests would be able to come in here and escape. There we go, that's me finishing off and realizing that I can actually dye these pieces. So we could have done that from the beginning, but like I said, the white offers a nice little bit of extra depth to the build, so I'm not too bothered about it. It was then just a case of putting on some finishing trims. That was going to have a big sign on it, probably King Louis's Church or something. King Louis? His name's not Louis. Louis, the Jungle Book. Julian. Yeah, I said Julian at the start. I hope I did anyway. If I didn't, I'm deeply ashamed of my knowledge of these films. Anyway, we finished off some final bits of trim. And I don't really know what to do with the curved trims for these pieces. I may actually colour them and try and match them to the Arctic wood as much as I possibly can. It should look okay, but we do need to be careful of how we actually trim everything. So, pretty happy with how things are at the moment, and that's a decent start to this build. We're then putting in some guest paths, and then we need to go into the build itself and work on where we're going to move our guests. Now the problem is they're going to walk right in here and immediately stop and stare, which is going to cause some people traffic. I would like to avoid this, but I think it's going to be relatively unavoidable. My original idea was to lower some of the ground here and put like a little bridge in, but it seemed like there wasn't enough room for it being a huge build. When we put our pathing in, it doesn't offer us a lot of space, really. So we're just going to do a loop path all the way around. I then experimented with areas where I could actually raise the path a little bit, because we have animals here who are going to be up a height, climbing in trees and using a load of different enrichment items that are up a height. So I'd like to drive our guests onto a platform of some description, and I don't know why I decided to start it here, because it would make way more sense to have a nice curved raised path right at the back of the domed area, so that people can walk up into the middle of the habitat itself and then look down on the rest of it. So I finally wised up and did that, and then it was just a case of making sure it matched with the main path. It also means we can actually build a little hide underneath the guest path there, where the lemurs can go when they feel a bit stressed out or overwhelmed by the amount of guests that are in the habitat, which is no doubt going to be a lot, because this is going to be new animals and people are going to be really excited and come rushing straight there. It also means that there's a focal point for when guests first get off the train, because they'll not really have anywhere else other than the penguins, and maybe if they fancy a walk going to the hippo habitat, there's not a lot else for them around this part of the train station itself. Then it was just a case of moving our barriers back in, and we're just going to skip ahead a little bit now, where I'm working on the interior design of the habitat itself. As you can see, we've already got the lemurs in place, and we're just putting in a few enrichment items and toys and things for them to play with. We still want to put the pond in, but it's not going to be as big as this. We're just using this tool to mark it out, and then we'll start smoothing the terrain around, bringing it back up so that it's a little bit shallower than that. There's no point having deep water. I don't even think these guys swim, so it's literally just a case to add a little bit more fluff into the habitat itself. And I wanted to do that, and then actually I'm going to bring back the little rocks that I had in place in the pygmy hippo habitat, so that I can actually make use of that and put them in place too. Next thing to do is to start working on some height based things. These guys love to be at height, and I am really looking forward to playing around with the climbable objects, because I've never actually done that before. So it's nice to actually get down and start working with these tools. I'm hoping I'm doing it right, but I'm probably not. But I do like to go back and keep checking that they've got plenty of navigable terrain and stuff so that they can get from A to B, and I think we're making pretty good progress on it. So it was just a case of building some runs, going from A to B, moving from one side of the habitat to the other one. We're going to put a nice feeder that's up a height, maybe make it like a bit of a tree house, so that guests are then forced round to that area at the back onto that elevated viewing platform, so they can watch the animals being fed from a height, and that should hopefully stop them all congregating right at the entrance there. I did notice that in the first kind of instances of this build, when the guests first started arriving, the lemurs got pretty stressed. So I'm also thinking about making some more higher elevated areas for them to sleep in. And I had a thought to actually put some ramps going up to those window boxes that are at the front of the actual habitat and make them into little beds for them. And that's actually well out of the view of the guests. They can have a height-based access to it, crawl up into that little crawl space and escape the guest for a little bit. I'm also, like I said earlier on in the recording, building a little hideaway for them underneath the elevated guest area. So that's plenty of stuff to play with, and they should have plenty of space to go and hide. Now, I know the lemurs will traditionally spend most of their time in nests in trees and stuff, so it's probably better to have these elevated areas for them to actually go in, but I thought it would be nice to have a ground level space for them to go to as well, just to make sure that they've got plenty of areas to escape to if they suddenly get stressed and overwhelmed by the amount of guests. We're bringing in tamarind trees. We're also going to use the tree, which name escapes me, that I used in the pygmy hippo habitat, because I absolutely love that one, and that's going to actually be our elevated feeding platform. So we're going to run up a ramp all the way up to the top. We also need to make sure that staff can access that as well, so it may look a little bit janky when you first see it once I've put it in, but we will work around and make sure that we get it looking a little bit more uniform and actually like it's part of something and not just something I've slapped in for the sake of it because I need to get it done. So we're just playing around with some foliage and things. I wanted to keep the trees small but have more trees rather than just having a couple of big ones. So we're using a mix of palm, tamarind and a few other bits and pieces, some of the elephant ear plants, and then we'll put a little bit more basic foliage in. We did put a mangrove tree in, but I think I may take that one out. It doesn't look quite right, and I can never really get the mangrove trees to sit right, but never mind, that's okay. And then it was a case of putting these feeders in, rotating the tree round so that it sits just nice, and then we can make that into kind of a little bit of a tree house. So we'll just wall it off on one side and put a roof on it. And then this is the feeder that we need to make sure that staff can actually gain access to. Now, they can't climb trees, so they're going to need a ramp. But also we can put the ramp in, maybe do a little walkway going all the way around, but I'm not sure if the zookeepers themselves will enjoy going on a run across the trees. Right, over here we are now building our underground, it's not really underground, under the walkway hidey hole for the lemurs. Hopefully they'll come in here and use it. It's going to be pretty cramped, but they don't need a lot of space, and at least we can actually give them a place to hide that's at ground level as opposed to upper height. We are going to put in a couple of higher up hiding places for them that should give them a place to run to if they do feel a bit stressed. One of my concerns about this habitat is that there's not really a lot of space for them to run away from guests when things get a little bit tough for them. So it may well be that we eventually remove some of the pathways going through here just to give them a bit more of a sheltered area to go to hide from things when they get a little bit too overcrowded. Because I have noticed when the population in here is small and there aren't a lot of guests wandering around, it's not too bad. But as soon as we get a huge gaggle of them gathered around by the entrance, they get instantly stressed and then have to run, and they spend a lot of time kind of looking for a place to get away. And I'm a bit concerned that that kind of becomes a running theme in this area. So we're going to try and do as much as we can to avoid that. May come back after kind of experiencing it in the flesh for a little bit and seeing how the guests go and how the animals interact with the guests that are in there, and then we can maybe make a few adjustments and things like that. So we're just using these nice big logs to give a little bit of a support to the rocks that are being put in place here, and we'll put some glass panes in just to finish that off, make a nice little window here. Probably not for the guests because they can't get up to see it, but the lemurs can at least look out of it. I just thought it would add like a nice little effect in it. We could maybe get rid of the glass at some point and make a wooden barricade, very much like we did with the pygmy hippo habitat, where we had that wood acting as a bit of a support to the crumbling fascia of the temple blocks, but I don't know, I like it how it is at the moment. So you can see there's not a great deal of space, it's more of kind of like a little corridor for them, but they do have plenty of movement space in there, and I'm pretty happy with the outcome. The next thing to do was to drop in a few shush signs, because I was hoping that would make things a little bit easier on the animals that are in there and stop the stress levels rising so rapidly. We may need to make some adjustments and change that around though. Next, we put in this ramp that I'm going to make some adjustments to, and this is where we're going to build our above ground, higher level areas for them to go to hide. And I just thought it would be a nice little way to utilize this extra bit we've got in place, so they can come in here, run along and gain access to a little sleeping area that's above ground. I thought it would be a pretty cool touch, and maybe the guests can look up and see them in there, but again, this is more for the animals themselves to look out, if they ever want to look out and see what it's like in the rest of the park, so that they can do some people watching instead of the people doing some animal watching. I thought it would just be a nice little thing to do, and it is probably one of the most invisible, I guess, areas for them to go to, so that the guests have absolutely no access to them at all. They can't even see them up there, and it gives them a nice bit of space to go to and relax and de-stress from all of the members of the public that are running around. We then moved these logs across and made some smaller pathing areas for the lemurs to get from A to B, and what I want to do is run this all the way along to a second sleeping area up here, and we're just putting bedding in here. There's nothing else, no feeders or anything, because I don't plan on allowing even the keepers to have access to this space. It'll be a nice sheltered area, so they'll not get the bedding wet or anything, and it should be okay. And miraculously, when they do leave waste up there, the zookeepers can actually vacuum it from down below, so it's not too bad. I'm not really sure how these logs work for being climbable, but we're putting them in anyway, just to make sure that there's at least some sort of pathing for the lemurs. We need to kind of make sure there's as much pathing for them as possible, so that there's plenty of areas for them to access these new places to go to hide and sleep and things. So I just want to make sure that every little bit of this area gets utilized and there's plenty of space for movement for them, because obviously we have this loop all the way around and the animals are going to get stressed. We know that's going to happen, it's already happened before, and I just want to make sure there's plenty of things to drive them to other parts where they may be able to hide and take a little bit of rest and de-stress and things. The last thing to do is to run a couple of extra runways across the habitat itself, just to make sure that there's plenty of accessibility to the feeding stations and things, and there's plenty of height for them to play around with. I know we hit the height limit quite a while ago for their like minimal requirement, but I just want to make sure that there's plenty of that, and I may even come back and do some even higher beams right up at the top of the habitat, just see how that goes, see if they actually get used, because from experience so far there's not a lot being used anyway, but as the population of the lemurs in here grows, I think it'll probably get utilized quite a bit. And now it's just putting some foliage in, just to add a few finishing touches. I'll probably put a bit more in at some point, maybe off cam, and we'll form it into the final episode of this part of the series. Put a few creeping vines coming down just to finish it off, add a bit of extra touch in there, and then I wanted to add in some big vines coming right across, just to make sure that we had a little bit more of a law-friendly habitat, I guess, if you want to call it that. These I always find a little bit difficult. Obviously, if you watch the habitat minisode where I talk about my creative process, I do like to put these in because they add a nice effect, but they take a little bit of moving around to get right. And I especially wanted to put them in because I'd like to have them coming right up to this tree and have them kind of coming off. I just think that looks really cool. But this one was a little bit difficult. Took a lot of toing and froing to get it all completely matched up and right. And then obviously we had to put in another post there just to hide the imperfections. I didn't want to make a floating ivy in there. So nearly done now, just putting in a few more trees and some finishing touches. I really like these rhubarb plants, but they're quite difficult to fit in because they have such a large profile. But again, we threw some down just to add a little bit of an extra barrier to separate the animals from that path. And then I wanted to put in this swamp tree as a feature piece in the actual middle of that pond. We do come back and I do use the stonework from the pygmy hippo habitat that I actually had to take out because it ruined the swimming footprint of the pygmy hippos, so that was fine, and I have managed to use it in another area of the zoo like I said I was going to, which I'm pretty happy about because I really like that effect, and here we are putting that in now after putting in a few more roots and things just to bulk out the habitat itself. I am still conscious that I'd quite like to put a few more bits and pieces in here, just some ground coverage really for like plants and foliage, just to really finish things off, but that will come at another time. I just wanted to get this habitat finished now, and putting in this rock work was pretty much the last thing I had to do before we head into our little reveal tour of the lemur habitat. Another thing I want to add actually is it looks like there's been a bit of a leak, and there is speculation that we're going to get a third type of lemur, which is pretty perfect, because honestly when I built this habitat I had no idea that it was going to happen, so it's worked out quite fortuitous for me. And I think this is the second or third time I've done a video and something incredibly fortuitous has happened to a habitat that I've literally just built immediately after finishing building it and publishing the video. But I am going to say that now that I'm recording the audio for this, I am aware that there may be another lemur in the works as like a free addition to people who own the game. I'm not quite sure which one it is, but it'll be quite exciting to see, and exciting to see if it's come to fruition. I mean, all we have to go off is the silhouette of a potential lemur that looks different from the two that we already have. So it may be just that it's an image that they've used, but I think it's pretty much odds on that it's going to be a third lemur to introduce to a habitat, and they should hopefully fit right in here. And we can have 3 different types of lemurs running around the habitat, which obviously means we kind of need to future-proof this habitat, which is why I'm overdoing it with the groundwork platform that they have and the height requirements that they have. One final touch, I didn't really like that this was just an open space, so I used some of the curved Arctic wood fence posts to create a nice little lip all the way around the top area, and when I redid the path we added the path barriers on there as well, just to give it that little bit of a safety railing. I didn't want to really design my own because it was a little bit of an uneven path. As you can see, as we pull this down, it doesn't look too bad there, but the more you rotate these, the more not quite right that they look. I guess that's the thing. So we wanted to keep this as just the main framework and fencing all the way around the top section, and leave it open at the back because they've got that wall there anyway, so we don't really need to do much there. And we put in the railings going all the way up on the ramps themselves. So really happy with this. Like, this has probably been one of my more ambitious builds in terms of the actual external structure. You'll probably notice that we've not actually done any work on the external structure in this video because I am saving that for the final episode of the series, where we go around and tidy up all of the external work in the zoo itself. So I'm really looking forward to doing that because it actually means we've completed a goal, which was basically to finish this entire section. And there we go, we'll just have one last look. I just want to make sure that we've got our water purifiers and stuff in place, so that's our last thing to do. And as part of our final episode there's going to be a huge rearrangement of the staff areas. I won't show you me doing that, but I will show you a tour of what we've done and why I've done it, and maybe we'll do a mini-sode on dealing with staff. Little bit of atmospheric mist thrown in there just to finish it off, because this is a rainforest habitat and we want to make sure that it's looking nice and rainforesty. Just a final few adjustments here because we actually lost staff access to this part of the habitat, so I'm hoping that fixes things. And it's time for our showcase. So here we are, our red ruff lemurs having a lovely time in the foraging pit with a baby there jumping on its mother's back. Before we move on now to the pond, looking at the guests coming in, you can see where they're all starting to stack up, and there's areas here where I'd like to make some small adjustments just to try and drive them to other areas to actually look at the animals. It'll help the animals and it'll also help the traffic control in the habitat. Lovely little view here of some leaves and stuff, and you can see the sheer height that we could utilise a little bit more in this habitat just by putting in a few runners all the way along, giving the lemurs a little bit more height to play with. Here's our ring-tailed, which were being a little bit coy and hiding from me when I was trying to get good shots of them. You can see the red ruff there playing along, running along that height there, jumping onto the ramps and moving down back to ground level to head for that foraging pit. And we got 2 ringtails playing there as well, and here's our baby. We've had offspring for both species, which is really nice to see, and we'll finish off by looking out from the underground habitat there where they can sleep. So I want to thank you all again for watching. It's been really fun doing this one, pretty ambitious, and obviously there's a few touches we can make to just finish things off, but proud with the outcome so far, and I'll see you for our big finale to this first part of the series. Thanks for watching. Drop me a like, a comment and a subscribe if you enjoyed this content, and I'll see you in the next one.